its war aims in Ukraine, and that's after visiting Kyiv to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky. This is the highest-level visit by US officials since the Russian invasion in February. America also pledging a further $700 million in additional military aid to Ukraine. Our correspondent, Jan Johnson, sent this report from Lviv.
This is the result of a strike on a substation providing power for the railway near Krasna in the west of Ukraine. Firefighters had it under control by the time we arrived. They confirmed nobody was hurt, but the damage was significant. Ukraine's military says it also shot down a missile this morning. We found some debris close to the attack.
This is one of the main routes between Lviv, Kyiv and the rest of the country. Attacks on the railway network were expected because these tracks have become the vital arteries maintaining the flow of weapons into Ukraine, over to the east and onto the front lines. And the trains are still running.
There were 5 strikes on the railway network across Ukraine. Disrupted trains also mean delays for people trying to get away from the fighting in the east. And the timing of these attacks could also be significant. The US Secretary of State visited Kyiv yesterday, promising more support.
The bottom line is this. We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene. And our support for Ukraine going forward will continue. It will continue until we see final success.
The Ukrainian president seemed pleased to have seen the most senior US diplomat.
Our
talks with them were long enough, more than 3 hours, and meaningful, encouraging and effective. I am grateful to the people of the United States and personally to President Biden for the strong and sincere support we receive, things that strengthen not only our state, but democracy as a whole.
There are more images from beneath Mariupol's Azovstal steelworks, showing how people are sheltering alongside Ukrainian soldiers. This lunchtime, Russia said it would suspend attacks to allow civilians to get out. But the bombardment of the plant, the city, and much of the east of Ukraine has continued over the weekend, meaning more loss of life. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Krasna.
Well, President Putin has been speaking in the past few hours. He was speaking from Moscow, addressing the issue of the war in Ukraine. He said the West was seeking to divide Russia, to destroy it from within. He added that the West was failing. He said our society is showing maturity, unity, and supports our armed forces. Well, our Moscow correspondent Jenny Hill gave more analysis on Mr. Putin's address.
I don't really think we've seen a different Vladimir Putin to the man that we've seen in recent weeks, probably recent months and years. In fact, you know, I'm always struck, actually, watching him speak by the thought that this is a man who is convinced that he is right, he's defiant, he's unrepentant, and he is sticking to that narrative. And that narrative, of course, is Ukraine is the enemy, but the real villain of the peace is the West. And so, as you say, he accused the West of not only aiding Ukraine in the battlefield, but also seeking and failing to destroy, to divide Russian society. Mr. Putin, of course, knows that he's got the majority of the Russian public on his side. He also knows he has the support of the Russian Orthodox Church. It was Orthodox Easter here over the weekend. There was a service here this morning, and the Patriarch, the head of that church, once again urged Russians to rally behind their president. So when Mr. Putin opens his mouth, he knows that he's got the support of the church, but he knows too, or he believes, that he has God on his side too.
Jenny Hill with a little bit more analysis on President Putin's address from Moscow. Well, we mentioned a proposed humanitarian corridor to evacuate civilians caught in the siege at the steelworks in Mariupol. It has failed after Ukrainians said that they had not been involved in the discussions to set it up. Our correspondent in Kyiv, Joe Inwood, has more.
Irina Vereshchuk, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, who's been speaking about this issue repeatedly, said that a humanitarian corridor requires agreements between both sides, and that there was no agreement, there was no truce. She said before that the Russians cannot be trusted in this regard, and therefore it was a one-sided agreement, it was a one-sided plan, and therefore hasn't been implemented.
And across the rest of the country, we're hearing about, of course, attacks across railway stations. We're seeing the absolute devastation and the destruction, the deaths of, as we heard, the 3-month-old child there. In terms of the attacks ongoing on the ground, just what do we need to focus on, Joe?
Well, there's two things, isn't there? There's the main offensive in the east of the country, in the Donbass. That's focused around the Ukrainian defensive lines. That seems to be at something of a stalemate. The Russians only making really quite slow progress, according to independent analysts. And then you've got this aerial bombardment, the assaults from the sky, which are taking place around the rest of the country. Now, we've seen as well, we saw, of course, those terrible attacks in Odessa that claimed 8 lives, including that 3-month-old baby, Kira, and her mother and grandmother. But then, as you mentioned, we've also seen today 5 strikes on various bits of railway infrastructure. So whether it's a substation, something to do with allowing the trains to run. Now, the reason for this, we think, is because the railways have been a crucial arterial route for getting in all of that military equipment, all of the aid that's been promised, that's been delivered. A lot of it, that is how it's going to come in. So if the Russians want to stop the Ukrainians rearming, if they want to stop the Ukrainians putting into action the benefit, the gains, the equipment they're being given by international partners, well, taking out the railways is one way of doing it. It does, of course, have the other effect of stopping people who want to flee the fighting, stops them from getting to safety.
Joe Inwood there with that update. Lots more, of course, on our website. And like as Joe was saying, that humanitarian corridor unsuccessful. Stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, we'll be looking at a mystery strain of severe hepatitis in children. It's reported in 12 countries. We'll be looking at what could be causing it.
Nothing, it seems, was too big to withstand the force of the tornado. The extent of the devastation will lead to renewed calls for government help to build better housing.
Internationally, there have already been protests. Sweden says it received no warning of the accident. Indeed, the Russians at first denied anything had gone wrong. Only when radioactivity levels began to increase outside Russia were they forced to admit the accident.
For the Mujahideen, the mood here is of great celebration. This is the end of a 12-year war for them. They've taken the capital, which they've been fighting for so long.
It was 7 o'clock in the morning, on the day when power began to pass from the minority to the majority, when Africa, after 300 years, reclaimed its last white colony.
Welcome, you're watching Impact on BBC World News. We're going to turn to China now, where the capital, Beijing, has begun mass testing for millions of people after a sharp rise in COVID cases. Well, long queues have been forming outside supermarkets and shops, and that's despite government assurances over food supplies. There are fears that there could be a lockdown in the capital lasting weeks, as is happening in Shanghai. Stephen McDonald has more details.
Beijing residents have rushed to buy food and other provisions. There's fear that the capital could be locked down like Shanghai, with its significant shortages of daily necessities. On social media, footage is circulating of empty shelves and crowds of shoppers lining up well into the night. The daily infection rate hasn't been high in Beijing, but the government has ordered mass testing, warning that Omicron may have been spreading significantly in the city over the past week.
This is the scene throughout the Chaoyang district of Beijing, with people lining up to have COVID tests today. Everyone in Chaoyang district this week has to do 3 COVID tests. Now, Chaoyang is a huge area. It's as big as a city itself. There are millions of people living and working in Chaoyang. And although there have only been 19 extra official cases added today to Beijing's COVID total, the fact that this testing is going on has really spooked residents in the city.
We're panicking a bit, this man said, adding that it's impossible not to panic. He showed us his shopping with disinfectant soap, vegetables, milk and the like. But a woman said she hasn't stocked up on food at all because she thinks that the situation here won't become like that in Shanghai. The extent to which this city is to be locked down will depend on the results of mass testing over the coming days. Stephen McDonald, BBC News, Beijing.
Mass burials are expected to take place in the coming hours for dozens of victims of a huge explosion at an illegal oil refinery in the southeastern Nigerian state of Imo. The death toll is climbing, with officials now saying that at least 110 people were killed. Azadeh Mashiri reports.
In Nigeria, this is all that's left of some of the dozens dead after an overwhelming fire ripped through an illegal oil refinery in Imo State. Emergency workers and relatives have been scouring through the wreckage, but many are at a loss, with the bodies of their loved ones burnt beyond recognition.
We've agreed with the chairman of the local government so they can do mass burial, because obviously they cannot identify the bodies. They're badly charred, you know. Then the next thing will be to fumigate the area so that to stop, possibly anything, diseases, outbreak of diseases around this vicinity.
Poverty and unemployment has made illegal refining attractive, often with deadly consequences. Nigeria now loses an average of 200,000 barrels of crude oil per day because of this activity. That's more than 10% of Nigeria's oil production. And despite the country being Africa's top oil producer, there are still fuel shortages. That's why some of these cars were torched while their owners were waiting to buy illegal oil. Nigeria's President Buhari has said more will be done to crack down on illegal refineries. But his critics argue this kind of tragedy is not the first, and it's likely not the last. Azadeh Mashiri, BBC News.
The World Health Organization says it's identified more than 100 people who came into contact with a new case of the Ebola virus in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're now being closely monitored for symptoms, and vaccinations will start in the next few days. This is the third Ebola outbreak in Equatorial Province since 2018. Australia and New Zealand have, for the first time in 2 years, held large-scale events on Anzac Day. Both countries had to cancel or limit memorial services in previous years because of the coronavirus pandemic. The event commemorates the failed Allied assault on the Gallipoli Peninsula in the First World War in what is now Turkey. In an address in Auckland, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the invasion of Ukraine was a most grim reminder of the fragile nature of peace and the devastating impact of war. The World Health Organization says at least 169 cases of acute child hepatitis of unknown origin have been recorded in 12 countries. More than 100 of them have been identified in the UK since January. Other countries, including the US and Spain, have also reported severe inflammation of the liver in otherwise healthy young children. Well, earlier I spoke with our health correspondent Michelle Roberts, who told me more about what we're seeing.
Typically 1 to 4 year old sort of age range, and it's inflammation of the liver. And they've been trying to find out why this is happening. It's still very unusual, rare, and they think it might be linked to a virus called adenovirus. It has been known to be linked with this before, but they've seen more cases than they would have expected. This has come about since we've been unlocking from the pandemic, and they're wondering whether the two are linked, that possibly children haven't been out and about and exposed to all these common viruses so much, and now we're seeing some of these cases. Now, the things that the parents are noticing in these unusual cases is some jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and the eyes, and also some stomach upset, so a bit of vomiting, feeling sick in the stomach. It is important to stress this is rare. Investigations are still ongoing, and they really want to find out what exactly is the cause. But at the moment, they think it might be this virus that lots of us catch as a common cold.
But of course, affecting these younger children much more severely. But in terms of the case numbers, you were putting that caution on them. Just important to just remind parents it's not as systemic as arguably you'd worry about.
We've got 169 globally, which is why people are investigating it, but it still is rare, but it's very serious and important to understand, because 8 of these children have needed liver transplants, and sadly we've had 1 death as well.
So you talk about the signs of jaundice. What else do we need to look out for?
So these are children that have seem like they've caught something. They haven't really got a fever, many of them, but they do get this yellowing of the skin in the eyes, and an upset stomach, and feel quite unwell with it. And then you notice that they're not getting better. So it's important to seek help. If you're in doubt, seek help.
If you're in doubt, do seek help. Our thanks to Michelle Roberts on that hepatitis cases that are being reported. Now, just time to tell you the crew of the first fully commercial mission to the International Space Station are heading back to Earth. The SpaceX capsule carrying 3 business people, led by a former NASA astronaut, is due to parachute into the Atlantic off Florida a little later on. When we get news of it, of course, we'll bring it to you. Thanks for watching BBC World News.
Hello. High pressure dominates the weather in the north of Europe over the next few days. That means plenty of dry conditions with weather systems forced down towards the south. One swirl of cloud here on the satellite picture working eastwards. Another area of low pressure in the Atlantic that will start to influence the weather across Iberia. So as we move into Tuesday, as that area of low pressure begins to spin its way in, we'll see showers breaking out across Portugal, some into Spain as well. One weather system moving across parts of Germany and the Alps, bringing some outbreaks of rain, some warmth and some sunshine through Turkey and into Cyprus. Temperatures in Cyprus getting into the high 20s or low 30s Celsius. Mainly fine there across Italy, but more cloud and some showers getting into Iberia. 19 degrees in Lisbon. As we look further north, mainly fine across a good part of France, but some rain across southern Germany down towards the Alps. And generally, it's rather cool at the moment across Scandinavia. That cool air, if anything, starting to push a little further southwards as we get on into Wednesday. This weather system continues its journey eastwards. Warm and sunny conditions to the southeast of that, 26 degrees in Athens, and it turns increasingly unsettled for Spain and for Portugal. We will see showers in Madrid through Wednesday into Thursday. It turns drier and a little warmer here for the end of the week. Temperatures in Paris getting to 20 or 21 degrees. Berlin seeing highs of around 16 or 17, and some sunshine in Athens.
Our global food system is under profound pressure from climate change, population growth, and fractured supply chains.
But might these shocks to our system actually be a catalyst for positive change?
We have to wake up and we have to feed the world. That's a big job.
Can farmers, scientists, and innovators overcome these challenges to protect the future of our food? Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
Muya was a hell.
Behind every headline,
I had this feeling that I'm entering a prison.
there is a human story.
This
is Our World.
I just seen the cops kill somebody.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
Our World, this weekend on BBC World News.
Are companies doing enough to make a stand against Russia? I get the view from the man behind the list on corporate action and inaction. I also speak to the boss of Ukraine's top energy firm about restricting the flow of gas funds to Russia. Join me, Aaron Heselhurst, on Talking Business Weekly, here on BBC World News.
In Myanmar, we go inside the resistance, a people's army prepared to sacrifice everything to restore democracy. Our World, Myanmar Inside the Resistance on BBC World News.
Next on Hard Talk, my guest is former Russian oligarch turned arch-Putin foe, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He wants more sanctions on Russia, more weapons to Ukraine, and he says Putin is vulnerable. But is that wishful thinking?
Need your fix of the beautiful game? Then head to the BBC Sport website and app. With goal alerts, score predictions and top punditry. Go online or download the app now.
Welcome, this is BBC World News. I'm Kasia Madeira. Our main headlines. European countries and the US have warmly congratulated Emmanuel Macron on his re-election. President Biden said he looked forward to working closely with Mr. Macron on Ukraine. Russia's President Putin also said his congratulations, wishing Mr. Macron success. The US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says he wants Russia to be weakened so it can't repeat its actions in Ukraine. He made the remarks in Poland after a trip to Kyiv with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Fears that the Chinese capital, Beijing, could soon be ordered into lockdown like Shanghai has led to panic buying. Supermarket shelves have been cleared of food and basic necessities. And Twitter has reportedly agreed to sell its platform to the billionaire Elon Musk in a deal worth around $43 billion. US media reports say Twitter's board of directors has accepted the offer.
Now on BBC World News, Hard Talk asks tough questions in interviews with people who are shaping the news.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. What lessons have the Russians learned from the progress or lack of it of their military offensive in Ukraine? Right now, Russian forces are focused in the east of the country, the Donbass. And what happens in the next few weeks will be critical for the future of Ukraine, of Russia, and of European security. My guest is the former Russian oligarch turned arch-Putin foe, Mikhail Khodorkovsky. If Putin is cornered, how will he respond? Mikhail Khodorkovsky, welcome to Hard Talk.
Здравствуйте.
Western leaders say that Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine must fail. Do you think they understand what it will take to ensure that Putin's war ends in defeat?
Я думаю, что сейчас они это понимают лучше, чем раньше, но не уверен, что до конца. Путин объявил, что он считает своей победой, и это была его ошибка. Он объявил, что фактически он хочет сменить власть в Киеве, и это ему не удалось. И с этой точки зрения, конечно, на сегодняшний день он терпит поражение. Но мы с вами не знаем, насколько много дополнительных сил он готов использовать для того, чтобы добиться своей идиотской цели.
In a sense, this war is about will. It's about the will and determination of Putin, about the will of the Ukrainians led by Zelensky, and also about the will of the West to confront Putin. Whose will right now do you think is the strongest? You know Putin well. I'd be interested in your answer.
Сегодня Путин считает, что он побеждает и что он способен справиться с теми очевидными проблемами, которые выявились в его вооруженных силах и в его вообще изначальной концепции захвата Украины. Готов ли он на самом деле идти до конца? Я не уверен. Я считаю, что если он сейчас потерпит поражение в битве за Донбасс, то ему придется отступить.
Really? Because there is a school of thought in the West that Putin cannot afford a humiliation in Ukraine. And if he is facing humiliation, he will use all of the weaponry at his disposal, including weapons of mass destruction, including, some believe, nuclear weapons. Are you saying that fear is misplaced?
Я считаю, что у Путина не так много сил, как многим кажется. Это сейчас выявили те 1,5 месяца, которые прошли с начала войны. Может ли он применить ядерное оружие в Украине? Ну, наверное, может, если западные лидеры будут его уговаривать, что, Владимир Владимирович, что бы ты ни сделал в Украине, мы не будем тебе всерьез противостоять. Но если они, как, например, господин Байден, его уговаривать не будут, а скажут, как он сказал, что ответ будет адекватным, то я не верю, что господин Путин решится отдать своим генералам команду на применение ядерного оружия.
You visited Washington, D.C. just a few days ago. You spoke to US officials. You've seen their latest assistance package for Ukraine, $800 million of new weaponry, perhaps some heavier weaponry than we've seen before, but still nothing like the list that President Zelensky wants of heavy artillery, fighter jets, all sorts of things which he is not getting. As you talk to the Americans and to European leaders as well, do you believe that they will never provide this weaponry? Or perhaps they'll provide it, but maybe it'll be too late? What is your message to them?
Я им говорю, что они до последнего времени все время опаздывали. Они все время делали тот шаг, который нужно было сделать на месяц раньше. Но сейчас ситуация начала потихонечку меняться. То есть мое ощущение, что то вооружение, которое сейчас предоставляется Украине, это ровно то вооружение, которым именно сейчас Украина способна воспользоваться. Более того, Запад начал опережающим образом учить украинских военных использованию того нового вооружения, которое, может быть, сейчас не поступает, но будет поступать позже. Это тоже очень правильный и очень важный сигнал всем участникам этой схватки. Мне кажется, что сейчас Запад осознал, перед каким выбором он стоит. Базовое то, что я говорю западным лидерам, это в вашей голове Путин еще не воюет с НАТО. А в его-то голове, и он об этом говорил много раз, он как раз воюет и с НАТО, и с Соединенными Штатами, а вовсе не с какой-то там Украиной. И если в вашей голове для того, чтобы Путин сделал следующий шаг и перешел границу одной из натовских стран, Путину нужно сделать некое дополнительное усилие, то в его голове это уже произошло, он уже воюет с НАТО. И ваш выбор заключается в том, вы нанесете поражение Путину на территории Украины, или потом вам придется наносить это поражение ему, но уже на территории одной из стран НАТО. Вот в этом на самом деле выбор.
This isn't just about weapons, is it? It's also about the vast amounts of money that the West, particularly the Europeans, send to Russia every single day, every single week, every month of the year in terms of payments for oil and gas. Hundreds of millions of dollars every single day. Why hasn't that oil and gas revenue to Russia been cut off?
Потому что, на мой взгляд, Запад несколько лет или даже, может быть, 10 лет назад сделал фатальную ошибку, полагаясь на российские энергоносители, на российскую нефть и газ. А Путин уже 10 лет назад было ясно, куда он ведет историю. Именно в этот момент нужно было предпринимать шаги, обеспечивая свою энергетическую безопасность. Ну что ж, лучше поздно, чем никогда. Но сегодня Западу приходится платить за свои ошибки. Представим себе, что даже Украина здесь ни при чем. Да? Представим себе просто ситуацию, когда такой поставщик, как Россия, и мы это видим на сегодняшний день, в лице Путина использует нефть и газ как оружие политического давления на Запад. Ну, я не знаю, какое здесь восприятие этой ситуации, но мое личное восприятие, когда на меня давят, я должен сделать все, чтобы это давление обнулить.
But we are where we are. The German Chancellor Scholz says that if Germany was to cut off the gas taps from Russia tomorrow, hundreds of thousands of Germans would be thrown out of work. Do you really believe that is a politically viable option for a country like Germany?
Я считаю, что существует то, что желательно, и то, что возможно. Желательно, конечно, на сегодняшний день поставить Путина перед невозможностью оплачивать свою агрессию деньгами от поставок нефти и газа. Возможно ли это на сегодняшний день? Может быть.
And let me stop you there, because you are the former boss of Yukos Energy. You were once arguably Russia's richest energy oligarch. You know that sector better than anybody. If Europe, in particular, stopped buying Russian oil and gas, how quickly would Putin's war machine and the Russian economy collapse, or at least no longer be able to function in the way it functions today?
Я думаю, что если Путину придется переориентировать поставки нефти и газа с Европы на азиатские рынки, то он потеряет больше, чем половину своих доходов. Это половина доходов федерального бюджета. Сможет ли он в этом случае продолжать вести войну, и сколько времени он сможет в этом случае продолжать вести войну, мне сложно сказать, я все-таки не военный эксперт. Но думаю, что это будет очень серьезным ударом.
In the meantime, what we see as Europe discusses oil and gas, but frankly does very little about it, what we see is some limited sanctions on the banking sector. They've stopped importing coal, or at least they're promising to, and they've taken measures to freeze the huge reserves of Russian money in overseas banks, and they've targeted oligarchs. Now, you speak to me as a former Russian oligarch. Do you think the seizing of yachts, the telling Roman Abramovich he can no longer own Chelsea Football Club, do all of these big headline measures, do they make any difference?
Важно понимать, что сейчас делаются правильные шаги, исходящие из неверных презумпций. Вот даже вы в нашем разговоре называете этих людей олигархами. Олигарх – это человек, который имеет возможность принимать участие в решении политических вопросов. Эти люди не являются в этом смысле олигархами, и я им никогда не являлся. Это путинские агенты, через которых он оказывает влияние, или во всяком случае имеет возможность оказывать влияние на западную политическую систему. Вот любой из них на вопрос, является ли Путин военным преступником, не готов дать прямой ответ. Хотя понимает прекрасно вот этот вот любой человек, что это именно так. Что это означает? Это означает, что Путин держит их очень крепко в своих руках, и они могут исполнить любую его команду. И с этой точки зрения блокировка их счетов, блокировка их возможностей оказывать влияние на западную политическую систему, на западную экономическую систему предельно важна.
As you see the terrible events unfold in Ukraine and you reflect on more than 2 decades of Putin in power, do you, in any sense, feel a sense of responsibility and deep regret that going back to the late 1990s and early 2000s, you were one of the power brokers in Russia that actually aided and supported Putin in his bid to take power after Yeltsin? Without you, Putin might have struggled. With you, he was a political force. Do you regret your association with him?
Конечно, я сожалею. Слушайте, я начал сожалеть в 2002-2003 году, когда я Путину в Кремле сказал о том, что его система построена на коррупции и что это разрушает нашу страну. Вот с этого момента, считайте, я сожалею о том, что в 2000 году и в 2001 я воспринимал Путина как нормального человека, продолжателя демократической революции в России.
Do you think he changed, or did you get him wrong at the beginning?
Мне, конечно, хотелось бы выступить адвокатом самого себя и сказать, что он изменился. К глубокому сожалению, конечно, он изменился, но да, я оказался среди тех людей, которых ему удалось обмануть. Да, я оказался недостаточно проницательным в тот момент. Я об этом сожалею каждый день.
And you obviously paid a very heavy price, not least 10 years in Russian prison. And you today are a very passionate campaigner against Putin and for what you call an open Russia, with an open Russia foundation, with an anti-Putin coalition of exiled politicians. You are doing everything you can to change Russia from outside, but would you accept that what we see today is the failure of your political campaign against Putin?
Вы знаете, что во время войны в тоталитарных режимах, внутри обществ тоталитарных режимов происходит вот этот вот наплыв военной истерии. И да, нам пока с ним не удается справиться. Но мы видим, что Путин опасается вести мобилизацию, хотя генералы об этом просят каждый день. Мы видим, что Путин боится задействовать на фронтах Украины все свои войска, потому что он боится тех выступлений, которые могут произойти внутри страны. И это достаточно важный результат. Другое дело, что он этого не хватает. Это значит, что нам надо просто больше работать.
I'm sure you are aware of the total information control that the Kremlin operates. You're aware of the narrative that Putin and his associates are giving to the Russian people, that this is Russia's defensive war, that NATO is seeking to undermine Russian security, and that Russia has a fundamental right.
The post office, while Gina ran the shop side of the business. But in 2009, everything changed.
And then all of a sudden, money started going missing. We had to pay the money back in order to carry on trading, otherwise they would have closed us down.
The money was shown to be missing from the branch by the computerised till system called Horizon. It had been rolled out to post offices across the UK from the year 2000. What Gina and Martin didn't know is that there were bugs and errors in it from the start, and Horizon wasn't always accurate.
If you had holes in your accounts, the post office would say they are your responsibility. You have to make them good because that's our money, and if you can't explain, demonstrate, you know how and where this money has gone, it's on you.
Over 4 years, £60,000 of mystery losses racked up, and the post office held Martin responsible.
They hounded him, they persecuted him. Didn't seem to be any end to it at the time. And then they told him they wanted to terminate his position as sub-postmaster, and they gave him 3 months. You know, Martin hit rock bottom.
In September 2013, on his way to work, Martin tried to take his own life and was rushed to hospital. He was put on a life support machine.
I think he'd been planning it, I really do. He was a proud man, and I think he thought he was letting us all down. His children, his parents, and me. They turned the machine off, I think, in the morning, and the worst thing for me was seeing my children. Have to see the dad die.
Martin was facing financial ruin. Gina is in no doubt as to whom she blames.
And it was purely down to the post office. Nobody else. So I blame them.
The post office says it's sincerely sorry for the impact of the Horizon scandal on the lives of victims and their families. And it says it's made fundamental reforms to its operations and culture. 2 years after Martin's death, Gina accepted a financial settlement from the post office but had to agree that she wouldn't discuss it. Now the facts about Horizon that Martin didn't live to hear are being uncovered, and a public inquiry is underway. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
And there's more on this tonight in Panorama, the post office scandal. That's on BBC One at 8 o'clock. Next to China, the capital Beijing has kicked off mass testing for millions of people after a sharp rise in COVID cases. Long queues formed outside supermarkets and shops despite government assurances over food supplies. There are fears there could be a lockdown in the capital lasting weeks, as is happening in Shanghai. Stephen McDonnell has more.
Beijing residents have rushed to buy food and other provisions. There's fear that the capital could be locked down like Shanghai, with its significant shortages of daily necessities. On social media, footage is circulating of empty shelves and crowds of shoppers lining up well into the night. The daily infection rate hasn't been high in Beijing, but the government has ordered mass testing, warning that Omicron may have been spreading significantly in the city over the past week.
This is the scene throughout the Chaoyang district of Beijing, with people lining up to have COVID tests today. Everyone in Chaoyang district this week has to do 3 COVID tests. Now, Chaoyang is a huge area. It's as big as a city itself. There are millions of people living and working in Chaoyang. And although there have only been 19 extra official cases added today to Beijing's COVID total, the fact that this testing is going on has really spooked residents in the city.
We're panicking a bit, this man said, adding that it's impossible not to panic. He showed us his shopping with disinfectant soap, vegetables, milk and the like. But a woman said she hasn't stocked up on food at all because she thinks that the situation here won't become like that in Shanghai. The extent to which this city is to be locked down will depend on the results of mass testing over the coming days. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Right, let's go to Antarctica now and the British Overseas Territory there, because the first same-sex wedding has taken place. Stephen Carpenter from Caerphilly and Eric Bourne from Essex tied the knot on board the RRS Sir David Attenborough, which they're both stewards on. The couple have been together for 20 years now, and they shared their special day with the 30 crew of the UK's new polar ship. And a little earlier, I spoke to the couple and started by asking Eric about the day.
Indeed, it was an amazing day. It was absolutely, unforgettable.
Well, I mean, unforgettable for so many reasons. Stephen, first of all, just tell us, why Antarctica?
Sorry, it's Eric. Why Antarctica? I mean, we've had the privilege of sailing on the Sir David Attenborough, and with the crew that are on board, they are our second family. I mean, this is our second home. We spend half our life on here, and the scenery in Antarctica is unforgettable, and to be working on this ship in the region, doing what the ship does, it's once in a lifetime event.
Once in a lifetime it's absolutely magical. Just before we spoke to you, we were just seeing some of the photos, which are gorgeous too. Now, normally I wouldn't ask about logistics because they tend to be pretty boring. But what's it like organising the logistics of a wedding in Antarctica?
It was a logistical nightmare, just to be the pun. It was all started planning last year when the ship was still in the UK, and we tried to get as much as the materials together as we possibly could before the ship left for the journey south.
Well, I did a foreign wedding, a wedding abroad, and that was tough enough, so I can't quite imagine the stresses that you went to. Just talk us through a little bit of the highlights of the actual service itself.
It was very emotional. I mean, we had the support of all the crew and the team that were down there, and it was very cheerful. There were quite a few tears around, not just from myself and Steve, but from the people that have supported us and helped us. It was unforgettable, absolutely unforgettable. I mean, as part of the catering crew ourselves, it was quite one of those ones where we were part of the crew setting it up for our own wedding, so it's a bit of a not normal, shall we say, but everyone supported us and we really enjoyed the whole day.
Absolutely brilliant. And I love, of course, it's weddings. We've always got to talk about the clothes and the outfits. I love, you both look very smart, kind of from the ankles up. The ankles down is the big snow boots on.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. Is when you go off the ship and to take the pictures and whatever, you do need the protective clothing to go. So the brogues don't match up, so you have to take off the brogues and put on the snow boots.
Brilliant stuff. Congratulations again to Stephen and to Eric. Now, despite it being pretty cold there, they were wearing sunglasses. The weather seemed pretty good. What about here? Here's Helen Willits.
Good afternoon. A little bit cooler today because we've got more cloud around, but it's not producing much more than the odd shower, so it remains dry. So that dry April story continuing, not as dry as last April, but we've only seen 30 to 40% roughly of the rainfall we'd normally see across the south and the east. The only place where we've seen average rainfall is up in Scotland, and still little sign of any rain for the rest of the month. And that's because we've got this high pressure, very dominant across Greenland and Iceland, also dominating our weather. It's giving us that chilly breeze coming in from the northeast though, which is limiting temperatures here, and it has lowered the pollen levels somewhat, but still high levels of tree pollen across Wales and the southwest in particular for the remainder of the day. And that breeze is still quite a chilly one coming into East Anglia and the southeast. We've still got a few showers with the cloud further north. It could be the odd one just about anywhere, but they are few and far between. It's cloudier than it has been, but there's still some sunny spells around. Temperatures highest where we have the best of the sunshine, which is across Wales and the southwest, where we have the higher levels of pollen. So just subtle changes as we go through the night. The cloud will come and go, but you can see we've got more distinctive cloud coming to the northeast. So that's going to hold our temperatures up here, but elsewhere they are going to plunge.
Staying sub-zero. To Mexico, most places looking fine and dry with sunshine, but as we get down into Central America through Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica and Panama, we will see some heavy downpours, also some showers affecting parts of the Caribbean. One band of very heavy rain drifting northwards across Argentina into Uruguay. Eventually that'll get into Paraguay, and also turning wet and windy once again across southern portions of Chile. Now we look ahead to Tuesday in Europe. We see an area of low pressure lumbering its way in towards Iberia, so that'll start to bring some showers for Portugal, for Spain. We've got another weather system bringing heavy rain and thunderstorms across central parts of Europe. Many spots looking dry through the next couple of days, but rather cool in northern Europe. This is Tropical Storm Jasmine in the Mozambique Channel. It looks like it's going to be moving towards the southwest of Madagascar with some potentially quite strong winds and possibly flooding rain, in excess of 200 millimetres of rain looking likely. Lots of showers and thunderstorms across central parts of Africa, and a rather showery outlook for the Middle East. Plenty of showers drifting across the Levant towards Iran, one or two breaking out across Saudi Arabia as well. 34 degrees, the top temperature in Riyadh. Now to South Asia, we've got some showers down towards the south, but further north, lots of sunshine and heat really building. Heat wave conditions developing with highs in Nagpur of 43 degrees on Tuesday afternoon. Further east, we've got a weather system moving away from the Korean Peninsula and towards Japan. That's going to bring some very heavy rains and quite breezy weather here as well. A little wave developing in this weather front, so I think it will stay wet for the far south of South Korea on Tuesday, and also some heavy rain getting going once again in southern portions of China. And to the north of that weather system, well, temperatures will be dropping a little. Plenty of heavy showers and storms through the Philippines, across towards Indonesia. There will always be some spells of hazy sunshine in between the downpours. Frontal systems approaching Western Australia, bringing some rain at times and quite cool air behind this weather front here. Ahead of it, still relatively hot. And then further east, some really wet weather, particularly focused around Queensland, much wetter than we'd normally expect it to be at this time of year. But for New Zealand, most places will be fine and dry with sunny spells. Highs in Auckland, 20 degrees.
But we hope and pray that finally after 40 years, the people of Afghanistan will have peace and stability.
My view of feminism is still really the same, which is that I think feminism is fundamentally a justice movement.
Africa will always remain important for me, And so I will continue doing what I do.
I could not have had a career as a gay man.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amreli-Waller. Moral support and military aid. The US Secretary of State and the US Defense Secretary meet President Zelensky in Kyiv. It is the highest level American visit since Russia invaded Ukraine.
We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene.
Russia targets Ukraine's rail infrastructure in the centre and west of the country. We'll have all the latest from our teams in Ukraine. Our other main headline on today's Global: world leaders congratulate Emmanuel Macron after winning a second term as French president. His task now to unite a divided country.
My friends, we will need to be kind and respectful because our country harbours many doubts and divisions. So we will need to be strong.
Nick Beak, live in Paris. Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president in 20 years to win a second term in office. But he knows that many voted for him only to keep out the far-right candidate.
Fears of lockdown in the Chinese capital, Beijing, promote panic buying as the government starts testing millions of residents. And the world's richest man makes a final offer to buy Twitter. Elon Musk offers to pay $43 billion for the platform. Hello and welcome to BBC News. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Russia is trying to brutalise parts of Ukraine but is failing in all of its war aims. He was speaking after visiting Kyiv in talks with President Zelensky. Also there was the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who talked of wanting to see Russia weaken to avoid a repeat of Ukraine. It is the highest level US trip since the start of the war, with America pledging a further $700 million in additional military aid. Meanwhile, Russia has targeted 5 railway stations in central and western Ukraine, while talk of allowing civilians out of Mariupol has again come to nothing. Here's Dan Johnson.
This is the result of a strike on a substation providing power for the railway near Krasny in the west of Ukraine. Firefighters had it under control by the time we arrived. They confirmed nobody was hurt, but the damage was significant. Ukraine's military says it also shot down a missile this morning. We found some debris close to the attack.
This is one of the main routes between Lviv, Kyiv and the rest of the country. Attacks on the railway network were expected because these tracks have become the vital arteries maintaining the flow of weapons into Ukraine, over to the east and onto the front lines. And the trains are still running.
There were 5 strikes on the railway network across Ukraine. Disrupted trains also mean delays for people trying to get away from the fighting in the east. And the timing of these attacks could also be significant. The US Secretary of State visited Kyiv yesterday, promising more support.
The bottom line is this. We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene. And our support for Ukraine going forward will continue. It will continue until we see final success.
The Ukrainian president seemed pleased to have seen the most senior US diplomat.
Our talks with them were long enough, more than 3 hours, and meaningful, encouraging and effective. I am grateful to the people of the United States and personally to President Biden for the strong and sincere support we receive, things that strengthen not only our state, but democracy as a whole.
There are more images from beneath Mariupol's Azovstal steelworks, showing how people are sheltering alongside Ukrainian soldiers. This lunchtime, Russia said it would suspend attacks to allow civilians to get out. But the bombardment of the plant, the city and much of the east of Ukraine has continued over the weekend, meaning more loss of life. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Krasny.
Well, the US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin reiterated the West's support of Ukraine in that visit as the war continues.
The first step in winning is believing that you can win. And so they believe that we can win. We believe that they can win if they have the right equipment, the right support. And we're going to do everything we can, continue to do everything we can to ensure that that gets there. So we're engaged with the Chad, engaged with the Minister of Defense, and as this fight evolves, their needs will change. And so as those needs change, we'd like to be one step ahead, but we're going to be responsive to what the Chad and the Ahmad believe that they need.
Well, let's speak now to Max Bergman. He is the director of the Europe and Russia program at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Thank you so much, Max, for being here on the program. How important was that trip from the Secretary of State and the Defence Secretary to Kyiv, and what was actually said?
Well, I think it was critically important. I think it's been a long time coming, given that other European leaders have been descending on Kyiv. And I think it was about time that top senior U.S. officials go as well. And I think what was said was that the United States, I think as was noted, remains firmly committed to supporting Ukraine. And I think there was probably a lot of conversations about what Ukraine needs, the military needs, how the U.S. can help there. I also think there was probably some discussion with Secretary Blinken about the economic support that is needed for Ukraine, given that the devastation that is also happening to the Ukrainian economy. And then I think going forward, I think there's probably a lot of conversations about a potential, diplomatic talks about how the U.S. and Ukraine can stay coordinated. That if there was going to be any sort of diplomatic negotiations with Russia, what sort of sanctions coordination, sanctions alleviation potentially would be in place. So there's a real need for all sides to be really coordinated, and it's best to do that in person. So I think this was a really important visit.
I'll come back to a couple of points you made there, but returning to the language, talking about winning, eyebrows raised when the Defence Secretary said we want to weaken Russia. Is that the logical consequence of the policy we've seen over the last 8 weeks, or is there any sort of danger of mission creep here?
Well, I think the administration has set a pretty bright line in what it's willing to do and what it's not willing to do. And that bright line is that it's not going to be sending U.S. forces to the fight Russian forces. And I think that's the bright line. But anything on the other side of that, in terms of providing the military support that the United States is providing to Ukraine, which is very similar to the support that the U.S. provides other countries, such as Israel, such as Egypt, that's not all that different, that Ukraine is a sovereign country and the U.S. reserves the right to provide military support. So I think that is, in the bounds of what has been accepted in this conflict. But I think one of the things that we'll begin to see is a shift in the types of military equipment that the U.S. is willing to provide, given the military situation on the ground. I think initially there.
A twin thought about that military equipment. How concerned are you when you hear, again in the last 24 hours, Russia warning the US to stop supplying more weapons to Ukraine? And do you think it's premature to be talking about sending diplomats back to what in effect is the middle of a war zone?
Well, I do think that the Russians have throughout this conflict have tried to warn the US and NATO not to provide military support. But there is sort of a long history of the U.S. and Russia and the Soviet Union providing support to the adversaries of each other throughout since the end of World War II. And I think there has, in doing that, we've enabled to provide support without escalating conflicts to the point where the U.S. and Russia get into sort of an armed spat. So I think that is, I think those warnings are. Russia's hoping that we will back off, but I think the Biden administration is doing the right thing by continuing to provide that support. I do think that this conflict is entering a new phase. I think it was important, the remarks from Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken, to note that Ukrainian democracy is going to remain. that the battle for Kiev, in a sense, has been won, that Russia has downgraded its war aims. And I do think that it is about time for the U.S. to consider reopening its embassy in Kiev. I think there's a lot of security considerations that have to go into that. But the U.S. operated a major embassy in Kabul, in Baghdad, in the midst of a conflict. And I think that given the relative security now of Kiev, at least from a direct military invasion, I think it's time to perhaps think about sending U.S. diplomats back and to begin to reopen the embassy there.
Max Bergman there in Washington. Great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's turn to our other main story here, because Emmanuel Macron has become the first French president in 20 years to win a second term in office and has vowed to unite the country after his re-election. Well, despite the scale of his victory, 58.5% of the vote against 41.5% for his far-right rival Marine Le Pen, the president has had to acknowledge a huge wave of disaffection after his first term in office, reflected partly in the most abstentions since 1969. But he also won many votes from people more determined to block the far right than support his policies. Let's go live now to Paris and live to Nick Beak. And Nick, plenty of caveats, but a convincing win this for Emmanuel Macron.
It certainly was, Matthew. Yeah, welcome back to Paris, where the sun has been shining for the main part on this, the first day of the second term for Emmanuel Macron. He's vowed to be president for all, but the reality is this campaign exposed deep divisions within French society, whether that's divisions between people living in the city or in the countryside, people who feel they're valued players in France's role in a globalised world, or people who feel that they've been left behind and are simply being ignored. So he's got his work cut out really to bring people together in that way. But the achievement here in being the first president for 20 years to be re-elected is no mean feat. And certainly today he's been congratulated by world leaders, notably President Biden recently, in the last few moments or so, has said he's been pleased by the result and is probably going to have a phone conversation with Emmanuel Macron at some point today. So bringing us up to date with all the latest developments is our colleague Jessica Parker.
France has opted for the familiar. And last night, Emmanuel Macron chose the Eiffel Tower for a victory speech, where he tried not to sound too triumphant.
My friends, we will need to be kind and respectful, because our country harbours many doubts and divisions. So we will need to be strong, but nobody will be left by the wayside.
It means keeping to the path of a centrist pro-EU leader who argues for economic reforms. Sylvia voted for Macron.
That's not my first choice, but in the second round, that's what I want.
Does France feel divided to you?
Actually, I work in Paris, but I live in really far away from here, so I can really see in the little town around, they prefer Marine Le Pen.
So it's Emmanuel Macron for another 5 years. Business as usual? Well, not quite. Last night he acknowledged divisions within French society and promised to try and address them, be a president for all. A nice sentiment perhaps, but a huge political challenge. She wasn't close to winning, but Marine Le Pen secured the far right's highest ever share of the vote and tapped into deep discontent about immigration, rising prices and communities who feel left behind. In her constituency in northern France, these Le Pen supporters were despondent.
I swear I'm never going to vote again. I don't have much money left, only for going out a little bit. We don't have anything left. Macron, he's only there for rich people.
I'm really upset. For the next 5 years, it's going to be a real struggle here in Nord-Pas-de-Calais.
Also tempering Macron's win, the fact that around 3 million people cast spoilt or blank votes, while turnout was at its lowest since the late 60s. France has kept its president in place, but the country doesn't quite march on as before.
So the big question is, how different will France feel and look in the coming months and years as Emmanuel Macron starts his second term in office. Well, with me now is Roger Cohen, the New York Times' Paris bureau chief. Really good to see you, Roger. Thanks for coming in today. What can we expect in the immediate weeks and months as Emmanuel Macron returns to the Élysée Palace?
Well, I think President Macron realizes that there are sections of French society that were neglected, rural areas, blighted suburbs of cities, and that he has to reach out some. And so I think he's going to make gestures on school teachers' pay, on pay for functionaries, he's going to try to show that he cares and that these people enter into his consciousness, because sometimes he did appear very aloof and earned the title of President of the Rich.
How crucial are the parliamentary elections in June? Because I guess they have an impact on whether he can get through that domestic agenda you talk about.
Yeah. I think it's important, certainly important. If he doesn't have a majority in the National Assembly after June, it's going to be more difficult, much more difficult to govern. He's got momentum. He won with a 17-point margin. That was a lot more than a lot of people expected. So it's possible he'll retain a majority, but it's by no means certain. And in that case, life will get more difficult for him.
You've been following French politics for more than 40 years now. Yeah. Can you just take us back to last night? How significant was it? Should we be dwelling on the fact that Emmanuel Macron was re-elected, the first time a president's been able to do that in 20 years, or that the far-right vote has reached an unprecedented level?
I think the essential thing, Nick, is to look at the fact that the core of France rejected Marine Le Pen, rejected a program that was xenophobic, sometimes borderline racist, rejected a woman close to Vladimir Putin at a time of a war in Europe, and safeguarded the values of the French Republic. So that, I think, is the essential message of what happened. Yes, the National Front is growing, 41% of the vote, but at one point it looked like it might be much closer. So the essence of it is the French Republic resisted that trend.
Do you think it's the end for Marine Le Pen, or maybe the beginning as she regroups and comes back in 5 years' time?
Well, you know, if you count her father, there are now 8 consecutive elections in which a Le Pen has been a candidate. So you're asking me if there'll be a Le Pen for the 9th time 5 years from now. And I think the answer is probably yes.
Interesting stuff. I mean, Emmanuel Macron was criticised in the run-up to this election for spending a lot of time abroad talking to Vladimir Putin. How is he going to split his time? Because he's cemented his place as a predominant player on the European stage. Of course, Angela Merkel's now departed. How's he going to split his time between domestic and international issues?
Well, Vladimir Putin congratulated him. I'm not sure how welcome that was to President Macron. I think he's realized that he has to focus on France, that there's a lot of dissent and anger in French society. So he'll have to balance the diplomat with the domestic politician. But Emmanuel Macron wants to change Europe. He wants a Europe of strategic autonomy, quote unquote. He wants to develop the European military, and he believes in an Europe puissance. That's to say, Europe as a power. And I think that will be an important part of the thrust of his second term.
Roger Cohen from the New York Times, the Paris bureau chief. Thank you very much for joining us. So as Roger says, extremely interesting times for France and for Europe too. Certainly you could hear the sighs of relief in Brussels, Washington, in London. They were not at all looking forward to the prospect of a Le Pen presidency, but as we've been hearing, much for Emmanuel Macron to be doing in the coming weeks and months. Matthew.
Nick, live there in Paris. Thanks very much for that. Now, still to come on today's programme, panic buying in Beijing after a surge in COVID cases and mass testing. We report from the Chinese capital.
Was a hell.
Behind every headline,
I had this feeling that I'm entering a prison.
there is a human story. This is Our World.
I just seen the cops kill somebody.
A series of documentary films that reveal the human drama at the heart of global events.
If I'm in jail, I'm living my life meaningfully.
Our World, this weekend on BBC World News.
Welcome back to today's Global here on BBC World News. Our main story here, the US Defense Secretary says he wants to see Russia weakened so it can't repeat its actions in Ukraine. Lloyd Austin was speaking after a trip to Kyiv with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now, Ethiopia's 17-month-old civil war has left thousands dead and millions in need of aid. A humanitarian truce between the government and Tigrayan rebels has been hailed as an important step towards finding a resolution. But many Ethiopians are struggling to deal with the impact the war has already had. In the historic town of Lalibela, the war and the COVID pandemic have left many without their livelihoods. Kalkadan Yebetel has this report.
For 800 years, these churches, hewn from rocks of monolithic blocks, have attracted pilgrims from all over Ethiopia. Located in the country's mountainous north, the 11 churches were said to be constructed with the aim of building a new Jerusalem. After they were inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List in the 70s, Lalibela has grown to be one of Ethiopia's most popular tourist destinations, hosting tens of thousands of international visitors each year. But things have changed dramatically when a succession of crises hit. First, the pandemic put international travel to a halt, and then came war. In August last year, as the deadly civil war that had broken out in neighboring Tigray expanded, Tigrayan fighters took control of the area. It took the government 5 months to recapture Lalibela. But with uncertainties abound, the town's lifeline, tourists, have not returned.
As I am actually 47 years old, so I haven't seen such a time actually in my lifetime. The things which changed totally actually after the war, I can say that. So I prefer to be in the pandemic than to be in the war. Lalibela is in a time of dark age, I can say that.
And many in the town are left without their means of livelihood. For 3 decades, Satta Zabanya has worked as a musician in Lalibela, entertaining tourists on his traditional string instrument. Now he's out of a job.
What can I do? There is nothing to do. Even when things were bad, there used to be weddings. Now, there are no parties, let alone weddings. No nightlife, nothing. There are no visitors. Only the locals who have been suffering in the war. These are trying times. It's difficult.
Ethiopia's civil war has created one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. The exact death toll of the war is not known, but a staggering number of people, including civilians, have been killed, and millions are uprooted from
country. But the reality is, this campaign has exposed deep differences within French society, whether that's people living in the city or in the countryside, people who feel they're valued players in France's role in a globalised world, a globalised community, and people who feel that they've been left behind, they're being ignored, people aren't listening to them, and they wanted to see France go in a different direction. But Emmanuel Macron's success in becoming the first French president to be re-elected in 20 years is something that has been celebrated by other world leaders today, and they've been congratulating him on this achievement. Among them, President Biden, he says he hopes to speak to President Macron at some point today. So bringing us up to date with all the very latest is my colleague Jessica Parker.
France has opted for the familiar. And last night, Emmanuel Macron chose the Eiffel Tower for a victory speech, where he tried not to sound too triumphant.
My friends, we will need to be kind and respectful because our country harbours many doubts and divisions. So we will need to be strong, but nobody will be left by the wayside.
It means keeping to the path of a centrist pro-EU leader who argues for economic reforms. Sylvia voted for Macron.
That's not my first choice, but in the second round, that's what I want.
Does France feel divided to you?
Actually, I work in Paris, but I live in really far away from here, so I can really see in the little town around, they prefer Marine Le Pen.
So it's Emmanuel Macron for another 5 years. Business as usual? Well, not quite. Last night he acknowledged divisions within French society and promised to try and address them, be a president for all. A nice sentiment perhaps, but a huge political challenge.
She wasn't close to winning, but Marine Le Pen secured the far right's highest ever share of the vote and tapped into deep discontent about immigration, rising prices and communities who feel left behind. In her constituency in northern France, these Le Pen supporters were despondent.
I swear I'm never going to vote again. I don't have much money left, only for going out a little bit. We don't have anything left. Macron, he's only there for rich people.
I'm really upset. For the next 5 years, it's going to be a real struggle here in Nord-Pas-de-Calais.
Also tempering Macron's win, the fact that around 3 million people cast spoilt or blank votes, while turnout was at its lowest since the late 60s. France has kept its president in place, but the country doesn't quite march on as before.
Right, let's go back to Nick. Hi again, Nick. So it's interesting, isn't it? There were leaders across the EU very quick to congratulate Macron. They were very worried for the future of the European project if Marine Le Pen had got in, worried about NATO, given her comments on that. So clearly, very welcome result for many across the EU. Where does this leave the relationship with the UK?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because if we cast our minds back, certainly before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, things were pretty testy, weren't they? It was a fractious relationship post-Brexit between France and the UK, between Emmanuel Macron and Boris Johnson. So will we see them being united in some way in the weeks and months to come? We'll have to see what happens, I think, with the Northern Ireland Protocol, the way that trade arrangements are carried out after Brexit. That would be interesting. But I think worth noting that Vladimir Putin has been among those world leaders to congratulate Emmanuel Macron in the last 24 hours or so. And that's an indication that the dialogue continues. You remember that Emmanuel Macron got quite a lot of criticism here in France for going to the Kremlin. Of course, Mr. Macron would say that he was trying to keep the peace in Europe, but a lot of people here saw him as being too busy to deal with the mundane stuff of election business in France and was really spending all his time on international affairs. So I think for President Macron, starting his second term, he's got to sort of tread a balance there, keeping people happy at home. And we know already a lot of people aren't happy. They elected him reluctantly, not so much because they loved his vision for France, but they desperately wanted to keep out Marine Le Pen. They wanted to prevent France electing its first far-right president, Lewis.
Indeed, and in terms of, I mean, I suppose every newly elected leader says it almost they have to. They're going to try and unite the country. Particularly difficult for Macron now.
Yeah, really, really difficult. And I think what will be interesting will be the elections, the parliamentary elections in June, because that will give us an indication of the parliament here, the composition of it, and the checks and balances and the friction and the frustration that Emmanuel Macron might face in trying to get through his domestic agenda, certainly. And what he was confronted with time and time again when he went to different communities throughout France, people saying they feel much poorer, even though, you know, the economy has been growing, unemployment has been falling, the cost of living crisis, as Marine Le Pen was talking about, how she was characterising it, this was something a lot of people were talking about. So he's going to have to try and get through some of his reforms, which he says will benefit the French people, But of course, one thing he talked about was raising the pension age. That is pretty controversial. And I think he's going to have to perform quite a delicate political operation if he's able to get these things through. Of course, he doesn't have to worry about being re-elected in 5 years' time. It will just be 2 terms for him, so maybe he'll feel the shackles have come off somewhat. But certainly very, very busy at home and abroad, and in the here and now, the Ukraine crisis. He remains the European politician who's had that dialogue with Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. Will he want to maintain that position? You know, at a time, of course, where Germany's got a new president, and Angela Merkel has now left the stage. Emmanuel Macron is left arguably as the predominant force in European politics.
OK, thanks for that, Nick. Nick Beak there. And we can see the lovely sunshine in Paris. What about the weather here? Hi, Helen.
Hi, Liz. We've had some sunshine, a bit more cloud though than yesterday, generally speaking, and 1 or 2 showers. It's, I think, felt for most of us a little bit cooler because of the lack of sunshine today. But we haven't been without sunshine, and in fact that's the story for the rest of the week. It will feel a little bit cooler from day to day because we will have a bit more cloud as that cloud just comes around our area of high pressure. So these are the showers in the south. We've had a few showers across Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland, but they're tending to peter out here at the moment. And we'll basically keep the status quo for the rest of the afternoon and evening. There is some good sunshine coming through on the east coast, but it's quite chilly. The North Sea is still quite chilly at this time of year. Now, as that cloud pushes westwards, it tends to melt away overnight. So again, starry skies and a chilly night with temperatures falling low enough for a touch of ground frost by the time we head towards dawn. Rather more cloud, though, is once again working across Scotland and to Northern England through the morning. So some more sunshine on offer for Northern Ireland first thing. The best of the sunshine in the south and some high levels of UV in southern areas tomorrow, as well as, again, very high levels of tree pollen. But it's where we see the sunshine for longest in southern and western areas where we'll see the highest temperatures, but distinctly chilly if you've got that north breeze on the north coast.
The night sky. The telescope changed our view of things, and modern astronomy was born. The Earth.
It's not at the centre of the solar system. The sun is.
The moon.
Walking across new terrain and planting a flag.
It's astonishing to think how far we've come.
Absolutely.
The eastern Donbass. Well, following a missile strike in Odessa over the weekend, a man who lost both his wife and 3-month-old daughter says he wants the world to know how they died. At least 6 other people were killed when their residential tower block was hit on Saturday. From there, Caroline Davis sent this report.
3-month-old Kira was just learning to laugh. In her short life, most was lived under the cloud of war. But in their flat in Odessa, her family thought they were safe. They were wrong. Yesterday, their building was hit by a Russian missile. Kira, her mother Valeria, and her grandmother Ludmila were all killed. Her father Yuri only survived because he left to go to the shops. Today, among residents rescuing what they could, we found him.
I came to collect things that were important to my wife. She had a collection of sugar sachets from everywhere. Everything in the flat becomes garbage and will be thrown away. I want to keep them for my memories.
Valeria and Yuri had been together for 9 years. His phone is filled with videos and photographs of them.
She was a great mother, friend, with all the best qualities. It'll be impossible for me to find somebody else like Valeria. She was perfect. Such a person could be given to you only once in a life, and it's a gift from God.
It's been barely 24 hours since the attack, but Yuri says he wants to talk. He hopes that it can make some difference.
My world died, killed by a Russian missile, and unfortunately not only my family is in this situation. It's the grief of Ukraine and of our whole civilization.
One of the few possessions Yuri has recovered from his flat is a pack of nappies. He hands them to us as we leave. Please take them to charity, he says. I have no need for them now. Caroline Davis, BBC News, Odessa.
Devastating story there, and Caroline Davis with that report. Now, we know over 5 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of this invasion. The organisation Helping to Leave has been assisting many people to actually get out. The group is also trying to help Ukrainians who've been forcibly deported to Russia. Ukraine's representative to the UN said that number is now over 500,000, including 121,000 children. Well, let's focus on that element of the story for the next few minutes. Bogdana Yakovenko is a volunteer from that organisation, and she joins me live now from New York. Bogdana, welcome here to the programme. So just take me through it. What sort of messages have you been actually receiving?
At this moment, we have over 1,300 requests from people. And what we see is a lot of requests either from their relatives or from the people themselves if they already have the internet or signal. And people turn to us because they want to leave the so-called republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, or the LDPR, or Russia. A lot of them, of course, have been in absolute crises, and they had no food, they had no humanitarian help. So a lot of them are quite in distress, and they're trying to look for ways to leave the occupier country.
I'll come to that, how they're trying to do that and the help you are giving in a moment, but give me an idea of what some of these people have been through, the people who've been taken to Russia, because I know you've been getting reports of filtration camps. What are you actually hearing is happening on the ground?
So we hear a lot of horror stories. People turn to us from various positions that they were put into. The most horrifying was, to me, was probably the story of a girl of 16 years old whose parents were murdered in Mariupol, and her mother had all of her documents. So when she was taken to the filtration camp in Donetsk, she did not have any documents, and a lot of these people are pretty much stuck within either these republics or Russia, because if they don't have any documents, it's very hard for them to cross the border into Europe. And what was the second part of your question?
Talking about who taken to Russia itself, the sorts of things that they are going through. I want to just put, so our viewers can see, a map onto the screens, because you are concentrating, and I know these forcible deportations are happening principally out of Luhansk and Donetsk. We have that town of Sumy that weeks ago, near the start of the conflict, we knew that people there were being forced eastwards into Russia. Do you have any idea of where they're actually being taken to?
Yes, so most of them are first taken to the so-called republics of Lugansk and Donetsk, and this is where all the filtration camps are based. So it's Donetsk, Novoazovsk, and then in Russia, and many other towns actually. And then in Russia, a lot of them are taken to Taganrog, a lot of them are taken to Rostov, and what we are the latest reports that we get, that some of them are taken to more far east regions like Cheboksary and even Sakhalin.
Now, tell me what sort of help you're actually able to give people that have been taken to Russia.
So all of our volunteers are working remotely, and we have a special group, which I'm one of the curators of this group, for the people who are taken forcibly to Russia or the LDPR. And I cannot get into most of the specifics of how we help exactly for the people's protection, but what we help them with a lot is, for example, buying tickets to get to the border. If they have documents, they have a pretty free way to go to Estonia, Finland, Latvia, or Georgia. And it's important to point out that Russia does not accept the internationally recognized digital passport that is recognized internationally everywhere. So these people can have more problems, and sometimes they are forced to stay within Russia. And another important point is that a lot of men are taken to the LDPR, and then they're taken to Russia, and sometimes they're deported back to the republics with the goal of mobilizing them to fight against Ukraine.
And I know that those people taken to Russia are told they can't leave for 2 years. There are so many different challenges as people try to actually make their way out of those areas. Just give me a sense of that.
Saying that this was untrue and that those workers weren't offered lower wages, but the MCA came back and said it was going to continue to uphold the investigation and the findings that it's found on the board the vessel, and that it's sticking with the fact that those workers were offered cheaper contracts. So it's been a real tit for tat of a workers dispute, and it's just a small part of what is this an enormous workers dispute about firing and rehiring and bringing in cheaper agency workers. But yes, the MCA have stuck firm and said it's happening, it's happened.
OK, we'll keep an eye on that and see what more comes of that. Second issue on this is ticketing. There seem to be some ticket sales go on sale this morning, is this right?
Yes, correct. This morning, I've been checking the P&O Ferries website pretty regularly and looking at how many tickets and when they come on sale. This morning at 7 o'clock, P&O Ferries were showing and listing crossings tomorrow, Tuesday, 4 a.m, 12 midday and 8 in the evening. They're also listing ferries for Wednesday. By the middle of the day, the Tuesday ones disappeared, the Wednesday still on sale. P&O then got in contact and said actually they'd had an error with the website and they shouldn't have been listed on sale. So a bit of a problem there with their website. As I say, P&O said they will inform us when operations get back underway, but at the moment there's still no clarified date as to when sailings will commence.
Right, thank you for clarifying that for us. Your third job to clarify now is people will remember the ships being held for inspection, and we now have an update on that too.
That's right. This is just some details that have emerged just this afternoon, actually. So the Spirit of Britain was detained by the Maritime and Coast Guard Authority about 2 weeks ago after an inspection on the 11th of April. It's come to light that some of the main 6 reasons why the vessel was detained was due to issues with life-saving appliances, with pollution and oil maintenance, and 2 separate breaches of fire standards. Now, we've put these accusations, or not accusations, but actually what the MCA found, and P&O have said that the safety of their vessels is absolutely imperative, and that they believe they are going through unprecedented levels of inspection to make sure that they can get their vessels back to sea. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said to Parliament and said to P&O that those vessels would be thoroughly inspected before they went back out to sea, and that is happening. But there are a catalogue of other faults that happened. Some of those, where are they here? Sorry, this has just happened in the last 20 minutes. More fire safety problems, labour conditions, problems with accommodation and recreational facilities, hours of work, garbage records, flag state documents, and problems with the familiarity of staff with life-saving appliance. Again, P&O said that the safety of passengers is the foremost priority, and any suggestion that its safety has been compromised is false. And just to, as I say, make sure, the MCA did clear that vessel for sailing last Friday. It's down to P&O when it does go back to sea, but it has now been cleared as safe. But that's just a list of some of the faults they found.
Lots going on with P&O. Thank you very much for that, Simon Browning. Thank you. Next, sexual offence victims are facing the longest wait on record for their cases to go to court in England and Wales. It follows a BBC investigation which found that last year it took an average of 9 months for a case to be concluded, but there are huge regional differences. Here's Dominic Casciani.
How long should someone wait for justice? In the oasis of calm of her home, Lisa tells me about the nightmare of criminal justice delays after she was raped in 2017. She had damning evidence against her attacker, a man she knew well.
I was led to believe originally that it would be quite a speedy resolvement to the case and that it would be taken on to charging and that decision would come about. However, it didn't happen in that way, and it was a very long, drawn process.
Police and prosecutors took 2 years to charge the attacker, taking him to court in the summer of 2019. But existing backlogs meant no trial before the following April, and then the pandemic closed courts. The rapist was only convicted in late summer 2021.
I think if I hadn't have gone forward and reported it, I would have been able to have brought my mental health round a lot quicker than extending the ordeal and having the additional impacts of a court system and just the lack of understanding of how people feel in that scenario of building themselves up to be knocked back down again, time and time again.
National data and the BBC court-by-court analysis shows Lisa's experience is not exceptional. Sexual offence complaints take the longest time to get through the courts, a national average of 8.6 months in England and Wales. But there's huge variation across the country, Leicester Crown Court being the longest at 15 months last autumn. Overall, the delay for all offences from report to Crown Court completion is 697 days. Criminal barristers say the system is chronically underfunded. They've begun industrial action, refusing to take on some cases to force the government to inject more cash.
A young junior barrister in the first 3 years of their practice is earning just over £12,000 a year before tax. A lot of barristers now are working under minimum wage. We're facing a huge exodus of practitioners from the profession.
This temporary court, one of many set up during the pandemic, is part of the Ministry of Justice's solution to backlogs. Barristers say there aren't enough lawyers to push cases through on time, but ministers predict that their long-term plan, including recording evidence in advance from rape victims, will turn things around.
It's very difficult for anyone that's been the victim of rape or serious sexual violence. You recover from the original crime and then you've got to muster the courage to go through the process. I'm absolutely committed to making sure that those victims have the support at every step of the way.
How much confidence do you have in the system having gone through all of this?
None at all. I would never, God forbid it ever happened again, or to any of my family, I wouldn't promote going through the system and even reporting a crime of this nature anymore.
Dominic Hashiani, BBC News.
Earlier I spoke to human rights lawyer Kirsty Brimelow QC, who said the situation just keeps getting worse.
Very depressing to see the criminal justice system on its knees. It used to be a system that we could be proud of, and we would very much try and export it as a model globally. And also other countries would look to our country as an example of how a system should work. That's no longer the case. In terms of just listening to reports, obviously hugely depressing, but also in terms of the statistics, they're probably even worse than that, because from a complainant's perspective, the average time in a serious sexual offence case, which means from complaint to the police up until completion of the trial, is just over 4 years now.
Just over 4 years,
It's not purely because of pandemic. There was a backlog of cases of 41,000 in March 2020, which was pre-pandemic.
Kirsty, sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to be clear, just so I heard it properly. Did you say just over 4 years from complaint to completion?
4 years for serious sexual offences.
And that's an extraordinary length of time.
2 years, an average, yes, so an average of just over 2 years for other criminal offences. The reason why, generally, one of the reasons why it's even longer for serious sexual offences is because those cases in part go to the back of the queue because many of those defendants are on bail and custody cases get priority.
Right. And what about the solutions here? What do you want to see happen?
Well, the Criminal Bar Association has reluctantly but very strongly come out taking action because the government isn't taking action. And what is needed is an immediate and urgent injection of cash. When the Ministry of Justice speak about backlogs going down because of pre-recorded interviews, as was said in that clip there, I think by Dominic Raab, the difficulty is that barristers are not doing those cases because they're not funded sufficiently. So there was an independent review and a report which was published in December last year, and that was very clear that there had to be immediate action, which meant a minimum of 15% increase in legal aid to practitioners without delay.
And do you think you're going to get that? What are the chances of that actually happening?
Well, the chances of that happening immediately, so far the message is it's not coming immediately. Potentially there will be an increase for new cases from the end of the year. But that means that payment then, the way the system works, that means that payment would actually only come through the year after and potentially in 2024. So that isn't immediate. And our concern at the criminal bar, and also we're supported by criminal solicitors in this, is that there just simply won't be sufficient barristers left to prosecute and defend these cases unless there is crisis injection of funding into the system.
Thanks to Kirsty Brimlow QC for that. And if you've been affected by any of the issues we've been discussing, there are details of organisations which may be able to help. Just go to our website, bbc.co.uk/action line, or you can call for free on 0800 077 077. Next, the widow of a sub-postmaster who took his own life after being wrongly accused over money going missing from his till has been speaking for the first time about the effect the allegations had on him. Martin Griffiths died in 2013. He was one of hundreds of post office workers wrongly accused, with some going to jail. Here's Coletta Smith.
Martin and I married in '82. We had 2 children. We decided to look into buying a post office, and Hope Farm Road came on the market, and we decided to go for it.
For 14 happy years, Martin ran this Cheshire branch of the post office, while Gina ran the shop side of the business. But in 2009, everything changed.
And then all of a sudden, money started going missing. We had to pay the money back in order to carry on trading, otherwise they would have closed us down.
The money was shown to be missing from the branch by the computerised till system called Horizon. It had been rolled out to post offices across the UK from the year 2000. What Gina and Martin didn't know is that there were bugs and errors in it from the start, and Horizon wasn't always accurate.
If you had holes in your accounts, the post office would say they are your responsibility. You have to make them good because that's our money, and if you can't explain, demonstrate, you know how and where this money has gone, it's on you.
Over 4 years, £60,000 of mystery losses racked up, and the post office held Martin responsible.
They hounded him, they persecuted him. Didn't seem to be any end to it at the time. And then they told him they wanted to terminate his position as sub-postmaster, and they gave him 3 months. You know, Martin hit rock bottom.
In September 2013, on his way to work, Martin tried to take his own life and was rushed to hospital. He was put on a life support machine.
I think he'd been planning it, I really do. He was a proud man, and I think he thought he was letting us all down. His children, his parents, and me. They turned the machine off, I think, in the morning, and the worst thing for me was seeing my children. Have to see the dad die.
Martin was facing financial ruin. Gina is in no doubt as to whom she blames.
And it was purely down to the post office. Nobody else. So I blame them.
The post office says it's sincerely sorry for the impact of the Horizon scandal on the lives of victims and their families. And it says it's made fundamental reforms to its operations and culture. 2 years after Martin's death, Gina accepted a financial settlement from the post office, but had to agree that she wouldn't discuss it. Now the facts about Horizon that Martin didn't live to hear are being uncovered, and a public inquiry is underway. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
And there's more on this tonight in Panorama, the post office scandal. That's on BBC One at 8 o'clock. Right, we're going to Antarctica now and the British territory there because the first same-sex wedding has just taken place. Stephen Carpenter from Caerphilly and Eric Bourne from Essex tied the knot on board RRS Sir David Attenborough, which they're both stewards on. The couple have been together for 20 years and they shared their special day with the 30 crew of the UK's new polar ship. Earlier, I congratulated them both and then I asked Eric why he chose such an unusual location.
Why Antarctica? I mean, we've had the privilege of sailing on the Sir David Attenborough, and with the crew that are on board, they are our second family. I mean, this is our second home. We spend half our life on here, and the scenery in Antarctica is unforgettable. And to be working on this ship in the region, doing what the ship does, it's once in a lifetime event.
Once in a lifetime is, I mean, it's absolutely magical. Just before we spoke to you, we were just seeing some of the photos, which are gorgeous too. Now, normally I wouldn't ask about logistics because they tend to be pretty boring. But what's it like organising the logistics of a wedding in Antarctica?
It was a logistical nightmare, just to be the pun. It was all started planning last year when the ship was still in the UK, and we tried to get as much as the materials together as we possibly could before the ship left for the journey south.
Well, I did a foreign wedding, a wedding abroad, and that was tough enough, so I can't quite imagine the stresses that you went to. Just talk us through a little bit of the highlights of the actual service itself.
It was very emotional. I mean, we had the support of all the crew and the team that were down there, and it was very cheerful. There were quite a few tears around, not just from myself and Steve, but from the people that have supported us and helped us. It was unforgettable, absolutely unforgettable. I mean, as part of the catering crew ourselves, it was quite one of those ones where we were part of the crew setting it up for our own wedding, so it's a bit of a not normal, shall we say, but everyone supported us and we really enjoyed the whole day.
Absolutely brilliant. And I love, of course, it's weddings. We've always got to talk about the clothes and the outfits. I love, you both look very smart, kind of from the ankles up. The ankles down is the big snow boots on.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. Is when you go off the ship and to take the pictures and whatever, you do need the protective clothing to go. So the brogues don't match up, so you have to take off the brogues and put on the snow boots.
Congratulations from all of us here to Stephen and Eric. Now, you can see it was cold where they were getting married, but they were wearing sunglasses, so it was nice weather. What about the weather here, Helen?
A little bit warmer, Lewis, a little bit warmer, but dry. Pretty much the same, actually, just without the tundra and the ice. So dry April. Not as dry, incidentally, as last April was. It doesn't look set to be as dry as last April, but it is going to be a dry one again for most of England and Wales in particular, and some of the driest spots, central and southeastern areas. Scotland actually have had their average rainfall, but there's very little sign of any rain for the rest of the month, and that's because of the pressure pattern, and that's high pressure with us, and in fact that's drifting down from Greenland and Iceland and becoming more dominant in the next few days and bringing with it a north wind. But we have had some sunshine, yes, coming and going. A little bit of cloud, more cloud than we had over the weekend, so it has felt cooler. The breeze, however, is starting to drop a little lighter. Underneath that cloud, there's just enough thickness for a few showers. Behind it, the sun comes back out. You can see that band making its way westwards, but they'll be petering out all the time, and just for most, giving a few spots of rain. So it's still, as I say, not too bad out there. Temperatures around about average for the time of year, but it does feel distinctly chilly compared with what we've been used to. Now, as we go through this evening and overnight and the showers peter out and the skies tend to clear in southern parts, it will turn cold again. Like this morning, we could have a touch of grass frost first thing tomorrow morning. Little less of an issue further north because you may have noticed more cloud. And tomorrow's cloud, once again, those banks will drift their way southwards and westwards. So I think more sunshine on offer first thing for Northern Ireland than we've seen today. Good spells of sunshine for Wales, southern and central parts of England. And tomorrow, high UV in southern parts. That's where we'll see the highest temperatures as well, obviously 15s at 16s, but tempered somewhat on the east coast because of the breeze. And again tomorrow, high levels of tree pollen across Wales and southern England too, with the sunshine. Now, as we go through tomorrow evening and overnight, it is likely that we'll pick up rather more cloud. Remember, we've got that high pressure
across the Korean Peninsula and the northeast of China. Rain affecting southern China. Also some rain moving across the southwest of Australia, and another weather system diving down through Queensland and into New South Wales. Again, that will bring some heavy bursts of rain. But the weather for New Zealand looks mainly fine and dry. There will be some spells of sunshine and temperatures in Auckland up to 20 degrees.
Travel is changing.
And we're on the move again.
We'll be finding out what travelling is like now.
Join us as we explore a world changed by new restrictions.
But there's still so much to discover and enjoy.
Let us be your inside guide to a world of travel.
And hopefully give you some inspiration for when you hit the road again.
That's The Travel Show on BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. Russia's unrelenting attack on the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. The grim reality after years of fighting. We have a special report from our defence correspondent.
What has been sporadic fighting over the last 8 years has now turned into a full-blown war, and they are being pounded by Russian artillery.
America's Defense Secretary and Secretary of State meet President Zelensky in Kyiv. It is the highest level US visit since Russia invaded Ukraine.
We don't know how the rest of this war will unfold, but we do know that a sovereign, independent Ukraine will be around a lot longer than Vladimir Putin's on the scene.
It comes as Russia targets Ukraine's rail infrastructure in the center and the west of the country. We'll have all the latest from our teams in Ukraine. Our other main headline on today's programme: world leaders congratulate Emmanuel Macron after winning a second term as French president. His task now is to unite a divided country.
My friends, we will need to be kind and respectful because our country harbours many doubts and divisions. So we will need to be strong.
And fears of lockdown in the Chinese capital, Beijing, promote panic buying as the government starts testing millions of residents. Hello and welcome back to BBC News. 5 train stations in central and western Ukraine have been struck by Russian missiles.